Welcome to Just Settled. On today's episode, we have Traci Weiss, who is an incredible family attorney out of Atlanta, Georgia. Traci, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today on Just Settled.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So yeah, we can dive right in. This was an interesting case you and I were discussing a bit earlier. I think the audience will be really keen to kind of hear about this. How did this family law or divorce law case come across your desk initially? And what were your first thoughts when you kind of were first collecting information and getting details?
Well, this case was interesting because it came to me after the parties had already started working together with a certified divorce financial analyst, or a CDFA, named Lisa Decker, who runs a company called Divorce Town USA. So before hiring lawyers, the parties got together with her, and she helped them pull together their financial information that they were going to need in order to move forward with the divorce. And then she referred them to the Amicable Divorce Network, and I'm a member of that. So they each hired lawyers within the Amicable Divorce Network. The husband hired me. The wife hired another attorney who is a member of the network. And she hired somebody who I've worked with before and I've worked well with in other cases. So it was kind of a good way to start out, knowing that the parties had already been able to start working together, and they were both interested in moving forward through the Amicable Divorce Network process in a way that was going to keep things peaceful for their family as much as possible.
Yeah, I've heard about the amicable divorce thing. It's interesting to kind of get a little more insight into how that works and what it is exactly. What were your, that said, did you have any specific concerns or uncertainties about this particular case, how it might play out? Just obstacles that you saw from the beginning that you said, oh, this could be a challenge here, or anything that may have stuck out like that?
Yeah, there were a few unusual factors in this case. I was only hearing from my client at first, and he was coming to me with some things that were definitely not typical, definitely not things that would be likely to be ordered if they had a contested case that went to a judge, and some things that were overly generous to the point where I was more concerned about how to prepare a proposal that would help him give his wife a level of comfort that she'd be financially stable, and that they would be able to co-parent going forward, but also not leaving him with too much exposure that he could be put in a bad position if his circumstances changed in an unexpected way. So, the parties had 3 children that were each in different schools. And so the custody schedule that he was looking at, instead of a more typical schedule where the kids are with one parent on certain days and the other parent on certain days, the way this family has functioned and continues to function is with both parents kind of tag teaming on a daily basis with all 3 kids. So trying to figure out how to make that work in a way that would accomplish my client's goals, would be agreeable to the wife, would have
Right.
the other attorney not scratching her head too much, and would be something that the court would approve, was a little bit complicated. And I was a little bit uneasy at the beginning of how we were going to make that all fall into place in a way that was going to accomplish those goals.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Like in terms of the client expectation, the husband and wife in this case, did they come to you sort of with the same, or obviously you said you were representing the husband, and the wife had a different attorney, correct, in this
Right.
case? Okay.
Right. In
So
Georgia, no attorney is allowed to represent both parties in a divorce.
understood.
They have to.
So what were his expectations in terms of, or what were his kind of hopes in terms of how it was going to turn out? I imagine custody obviously was at the forefront of things, but what were some of his other, I guess, concerns around expectation? How did you talk to him about that?
Well, one of the things that I really enjoyed about being involved in this case is, I often tell my clients, if both parties really focus on what's in the best interest of the children. When there are children involved, there's always a way to reach an agreement. And in this case, I didn't have the benefit of talking with the wife, at least when we were first trying to put together an offer. But my client, really, that was his overriding goal of everything, was to make this as seamless as possible for the kids, to make sure that they had open access to both parents and that their lives were not impacted by the divorce any more than absolutely necessary. And in divorces, there are so many moving parts. There's so many different things that have to come together. And it's hard, I think, a lot of times for people to separate out their egos or their hurt feelings that they have towards each other, to focus just on how do we make this work for our kids, and everything else is icing.
Mm-hmm. So obviously in these kinds of cases, you kind of raised a few things that were probably typical challenges that arise. You mentioned some unique challenges. What can you dive into that a little bit more? Just sort of like, what was the stuff that you were expecting, or you were like, I know this is going to come up, and what were some things that may have been a little bit more unexpected, or you were like, oh, this is going to be more difficult than I had anticipated maybe in the beginning?
Well, one of those things that was very unique, trying to figure out what to do with, was on support. My client had historically been the breadwinner, the primary breadwinner largely, and then had lost his job and was looking for new work and was looking at possibly starting his own company and things like that. And the parties were already living separately by the time they had finished working with the CDFA and had hired attorneys. But they were looking at trying to put together a plan where they would basically balance out their incomes on a long-term basis. So whoever was earning more would contribute enough to the expenses of the other party so that they would each be living very financially even lives. And that's something that is very, very different than any other divorce case I've dealt with. And I've been doing this for 23 years now. That was, very unusual. Usually people are more focused on what do I get, as opposed to how do I make this as fair as possible long term. Where that gets complicated, especially for attorneys who do divorce work, is we have to look at the future and remind them that this was a fairly young couple, and what happens when and if they remarry or have new romantic partners and new people sharing the expenses, the house and things like that. At some point, it becomes way less feasible to do that on a long-term basis. And how do we accomplish the goals of keeping things fair, giving everybody time to adjust from the divorce, without being unrealistic, right. About how things change in life, and without setting them up to have to come back to possible litigation in the future because we didn't think ahead on certain things.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of just timeline, like from beginning to end, what did this case look like from when you first learned about it to when it resolved? How long about did the whole thing take?
So with this case, it was about 8 months from the time my client first contacted me, about 7 months from the time he first actually formally hired me. Okay. So again, this came in a slightly different way than usual, where the parties were already working with the certified divorce financial analyst and getting together a lot of their information ahead of time. So they each consulted with an attorney. He consulted with me. Then they went back and continued their work with the CDFA for about another month. And then when they were ready to move to the next step, Lisa Decker, then sent their financial information that she had put together for them to me and to the other attorney. And then we exchanged whatever additional information was needed so that we could put together an offer. And then the parties first had to agree if they wanted to go through the amicable divorce network process, which is different than just an uncontested divorce, because in a contested divorce, most metro Atlanta counties will have an automatic domestic relations standing order that gets issued as soon as a petition for divorce gets filed. But that makes it a contested case that you're going to court and you have no idea what the outcome is going to be yet. And so you have an order that controls making sure people don't do things that make things messy while you're trying to negotiate. In an uncontested divorce, you don't have any protections. So through the amicable divorce network process, what we were able to do was have the parties each sign an agreement to maintain the status quo, which
Right.
protected them as if they had a standing order in place. So nobody had to worry about anybody cleaning out the bank accounts, not paying the bills that they were supposed to pay, canceling insurance, things like that. So everybody could just catch a breath and take their time and, make sure that we had the information that was needed to really put together a thoughtful settlement proposal on all issues that would accomplish the goals that would work best for this family.
So, because it was an amicable divorce and you kind of knew that going in, it sounds like, does that mean that you knew that it was going to settle and that there would be no court? Or at what point were you like, there's no chance that this is going to be highly contested? This is going to be some sort of settlement. Was that from the beginning, or was there a point that you knew that was going to happen?
Well, once I knew that the wife had also hired an attorney who was a member of the Amicable Divorce Network,
Yeah.
and I knew who she had hired, which is somebody that I've worked with before, and I know that is, I knew her to be a good resolution-minded attorney. At least I knew at that point that I didn't have to worry about the other attorney, helping to foster any unnecessary drama. That if things started to get heated at all, that I could get on the phone with that attorney and we could talk through some of those issues and try and calm things down and focus on what was really going to help get our clients to the end with their goals in mind, in a way that was going to protect each of their interests and protect the kids as best we could.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I like about the Amicable Divorce Network, because the attorneys who are members there, not just anybody can be a member. You have to apply, you have to be vetted to be somebody that is not likely to try and blow the case up or, overly litigate it.
Okay.
So that was a really good sign.
So yeah, that also kind of dovetails into my next question, which is about that negotiation process. So you knew the opposing counsel, you had worked with them before, you mentioned. How did negotiating with them work here? Did they try to, I would imagine they're still out for their client's interest, obviously.
Sure.
So are they attempting to sort of leverage or maximize their side of it and minimize your client's side of it? How do you advocate for your client's interest in these instances? And what do those negotiations look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Just because something goes through the Amicable Divorce Network process doesn't mean there's no dispute.
Right.
Everybody still has their own perspective and everybody still has their own goals. And it's helping to educate people to understand that in order to lock down the things that are the most important to each of them, they're each going to have to compromise on things that are less important to them. And you hope that you're going to find things that will mesh so that the things that are the most important to my client will not be the exact same things that are the most important to the spouse, so that you can find some middle ground there to accomplish what each of their goals were. And so, in this situation with my client having historically been the one that kind of paid the bills and things like that, we were the ones to initiate putting together a very detailed, very thought out, comprehensive settlement offer. And because there were some things there that were unusual, and I kind of expected that the other attorney, was going to wonder where we were going with some of these ideas, if the wife wasn't thinking the same thing that my client was thinking. We actually put in a couple of alternatives of, in this situation, we can either do it this way or we can do it that way. So it was something where she could accept an offer if she wanted to, but she could see that we weren't just focused on, my way or the highway. It was, very much we want your input on this. We want to figure out what your goals are too, so we can figure out a way to make that work. And so, we did that, and then it took a few weeks for the wife to be able to send back a counteroffer. And thankfully, a lot of the things in her counteroffer were largely in line with what my client had proposed. And then the things that weren't, we were able to talk through the reasoning behind them, the reason behind why the wife was suggesting doing things in a different way, to still try and keep the parties in the same positive, good faith negotiation mode, to try and understand each other better, what each other's goals were, and put our heads together in a way to accomplish them as much as possible.
That's great.
Neither one of them wanted it to be messy. Neither one of them wanted it to be ugly. And they both wanted to be able to be at their kids' events and activities and things like that without adding any stress to the kids. And that drove everything in this case, which was wonderful.
Yeah, that is. So what was the final outcome? How did it positively impact your client? What did it kind of all shake down to or look like when it was all said and done?
The great thing about it was, while they had these unusual things they were trying to accomplish that not only would a judge not be likely to do, in certain instances a court wouldn't even be allowed to do, because they were focused on negotiating it out of court first, we were able to come up with some really creative solutions that may not work for most other families, but really work for this family. And this type of negotiation makes it so that we can really tailor things to each family's own specific situation, so they can have what is going to keep the peace for them, in a way that they can each live with happily afterwards. And then, with this type of process, once we had the agreement done, then we go ahead and file with the court, and we file the agreement at the same time as the petition. And then they just have to wait. Georgia has a waiting period of at least 31 days. If it's settled by agreement, then at least 31 days after an acknowledgement of service is signed, then the court has the authority to enter a final decree. So client first came to me in February, and the final decree was signed in October. And and cost them a lot less than if they had to go to court. Even having one temporary hearing at court would have cost more than this whole process.
Yeah, that is amazing. It sounds like the outcome was positive, and that, despite obviously it being a difficult situation, you helped them navigate it, which is in the best way, which is incredible. Well, again, Traci, thank you so much for sharing this today with us on Just Settled. We appreciate having you on. Thank you for joining us, and we'd love to have you back soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it.